At the far end of the Americas lies Patagonia, a land once thought to be inhabited by giants. When Magellan's crew arrived in 1520, they were astonished by the stature of the native Tehuelche people and dubbed them Patagons, believing they had found a race of giants. While the myth of literal giants faded, Patagonia today is still the realm of giants of a different kind. This remote region covers over 1 million square kilometers, nearly the size of 2 Texas states, yet fewer than 2 million people call it home. In these vast spaces, giant ranches sprawl across the windswept steppe. Some estancias, or ranches here, are so large they encompass hundreds of thousands of acres, with herds that can number in the tens of thousands. Despite its isolation, Patagonia's rich cattle ranching heritage rivals the American West in toughness and tradition, a hidden giant of the cattle world that many outside South America scarcely know. From the high Andes foothills to the arid Atlantic plains, Patagonia's cattle country is as rugged as it is remote. Fierce winds scour the land year-round, often gusting over 100 kilometers an hour, and water is scarce on the dry steppe. Yet here, amid sagebrush and coarse grasses, hardy Hereford and Angus cattle graze under the watch of equally hardy cowboys, the famed Gauchos. These South American counterparts to the Texas cowboy have adapted to a land of extremes. They ride out across expanses so vast that by day's end, a lone gaucho on horseback might not see another soul or a fence line in any direction. In such isolation, self-reliance is paramount. Gauchos carry the tools of their trade with pride, a rawhide lasso coiled at the saddle, spurs on well-worn boots, and a long knife, the faca, tucked into a belt. This is not nostalgia or legend, it's daily life in Patagonia, where even in the 21st century a horse remains the best way to round up cattle, and where cell phone signals fade long before the traditions do. What may surprise American ranchers is the scale and resilience of Patagonia's cattle industry today. Argentina and Chile carved this region into ranch land over a century ago, and the legacy endures. Patagonia's ranchers manage immense properties. Some estancias are so large that owners measure them in square miles rather than acres. The largest ranches in the southern provinces of Santa Cruz and Tierra del Fuego carry up to 20,000 head of livestock, sheep and cattle combined, on a single spread. To this day, livestock far outnumber people in Patagonia's rural areas. In fact, early in the 20th century, Patagonia's sheep population reached a staggering 20 million head, while human inhabitants were few and far between. Such numbers may have dwindled since then, but the sight of vast herds roaming under an endless sky remains one of Patagonia's defining images. This documentary journey will explore that striking reality, opening with the modern scene of Patagonian ranch life, tracing its wild history, and then returning to the present to see how today's ranchers are striving to preserve a proud way of life in the face of new challenges. Welcome to Patagonia, the forgotten giants of ranching. Life on a Patagonian cattle ranch is a study in endurance and tradition. A typical day begins before dawn, when frost still silvers the brown summer grass where snow blankets the winter range. In the faint light, gauchos saddle their horses and whistle for their sheepdogs, trusty companions for long days in lonely country. A popular saying in Patagonia goes, "A gaucho without a horse is not a gaucho." And indeed, the bond between rider and horse remains almost sacred. Mounted up, the gauchos fan out over the plains to check the herd. With ranch pastures measuring thousands of hectares, a single ride can cover many miles. Gauchos skillfully use bolas, leather cords with weights, or lassos if a stray cow needs catching, and their dogs help drive the cattle toward pens when needed. Amidst the work, the landscape offers a majestic backdrop, snow-capped Andes peaks to the west and endless rolling steppe to the east, often with no fences in sight. Many ranches here still practice extensive grazing. Cattle roam large, unfenced ranges in search of sparse forage, a necessity in this low-productivity grassland. This extensive style means a Patagonian rancher might oversee tens of thousands of acres, yet only a few hundred cattle, adjusting herd size to what the fragile land can support. One of the most important events in the ranch calendar is La Hierra, the annual roundup and branding. It's more than just work, it's a cultural celebration. During La Hierra, Gauchos from around the area gather at the host ranch to help each other count, corral, and brand that year's calves. The cattle are herded in from distant pastures and penned. Amidst swirling dust and the calls of cowboys, calves are separated and wrestled to the ground for branding and ear tagging. Gauchos deftly press red-hot brands into hides, a mark of ownership that on these open ranges remains essential. They also vaccinate the herd, dehorn young bulls, and castrate steers, ensuring herd health and managing future breeding. It's arduous work, but when it's done, the atmosphere shifts to one of festivity. The hosting family fires up an asado, a traditional barbecue featuring a feast of Patagonia's meats. Slabs of beef and lamb sizzle over coals, joined by sausages and delicacies like chinchulines, grilled intestines, and criadillas, mountain oysters, all washed down with Malbec wine or strong mate tea. Around the grill, old gauchos spin tales of legendary rides and predator encounters, while younger ranch hands listen in, soaking up the lore. On these ranches, the gaucho culture is proudly alive. The men, and some women nowadays, still often dress the part, wearing berets or wide-brimmed hats against the sun, bombacha pants tucked into tall leather boots, and thick wool ponchos that cut the high-altitude chill. They uphold a code of hospitality and honor. Visitors who arrive, even unexpectedly, are welcomed with a seat by the fire and a hot mate gourd passed around, as sharing this bitter green tea is a cornerstone of social life. In remote stretches of Patagonia, neighbors might be 50 miles away, so these occasional gatherings during branding or holidays knit the community together. Cooperation is crucial. Ranch families often band together to share labor, since hiring extra ranch hands is expensive and youth are scarce. Indeed, one gaucho quips that in Patagonia, to be a rancher, you cannot be a coward. The life demands both physical courage and mental fortitude in isolation. The landscape itself shapes daily routines. Patagonia's weather is notoriously mercurial. A morning that begins clear and calm can see gale-force winds by afternoon and an icy rain by evening. Gauchos adapt by being generalists. They are at once cowherds, veterinarians, meteorologists, and mechanics. They mend fences broken by stampeding animals or toppled by wind. They treat sick calves in the field, often with home remedies if far from any veterinary supply. Many ranches are so isolated that gauchos might spend days at distant line camps, sleeping in simple outpost shacks while monitoring far-off grazing areas. In parts of Patagonia's high steppe, families live without grid electricity, relying on generator or solar panels, and ride on horseback to the nearest road or village when they need supplies. As one account notes, rural roads can be impassable mud in winter, so horseback remains the most reliable transport, and many ranch families traditionally lived off the cash economy, bartering goods and labor instead. Modernity has inched in with radio communications and the occasional satellite phone, but the rhythm of life still follows the sun, the seasons, and the needs of the herd. It's a demanding existence, yet many Patagonian ranchers treasure it. They don't realize they're missing a healthier life, says one gaucho elder of the younger folks who leave for the city, citing the freedom and connection with nature that ranch life provides. In Patagonia, such freedom, galloping across an open plain with the horizon as your only limit, is the reward for all the hardships. To understand how Patagonia became a ranching heartland, we turn back to the late 19th century, an era of adventure, opportunity, and also tragedy. Before ranches, Patagonia's vast plains were the domain of the Tehuelche and Mapuche peoples and roaming herds of guanaco, wild llamas, and rhea. These indigenous groups led nomadic lives, hunting game and moving with the seasons. All that changed when independent Argentina and Chile set their sights on the empty South. In the 1870s and 1880s, Argentina's government under General Julio Roca launched the Conquest of the Desert, a military campaign that seized Patagonia's plains and brutally subdued the native peoples. Chile, around the same time, sent expeditions to Magallanes and Tierra del Fuego to assert control. The result was that by the 1880s, Patagonia was open for settlement, at least in the eyes of those governments, and was advertised as a new frontier for ranching and farming. One of the earliest ranchers to arrive was Thomas Bridges, an English missionary who in 1886 founded Estancia Harborton at the far southern tip of Tierra del Fuego. His ranch, the first in that unforgiving sub-Antarctic landscape, proved that imported cattle and sheep could survive even at the end of the world. Soon, many others followed. Emigrants from Europe flocked to Patagonia. British and Scottish entrepreneurs, Welsh families, Italians, Spaniards, and Yugoslav Croatians all came seeking land and fortune. These newcomers received generous land grants or bought concessions for a pittance. In Chilean Patagonia, pioneer José Noguera brought the first large flocks of sheep from the Falkland Islands in 1877. By 1890, he had secured a stunning 1 million hectare concession, 3,860 square miles, on Tierra del Fuego to create a sheep-rearing empire. Together with his brother-in-law Mauricio Brown and business partner José Menéndez, Noguera laid the foundations for what became the Sociedad Explotadora de Tierra del Fuego, the largest sheep company in Patagonia's history. This company, formalized in 1893, would eventually control enormous tracts of land across southern Patagonia, running hundreds of thousands of sheep and even its own shipping fleet and meat processing plants. As settlers fanned out, Patagonia experienced a ranching boom that transformed its economy. By 1910, the region counted more than 20 million sheep grazing the plains, producing wool and mutton for export. Cattle ranching took hold more slowly but was present. Early estancias typically maintained a smaller herd of cattle for beef alongside vast sheep flocks. The wealth generated was immense. Wool from Patagonian merino sheep was baled and shipped to textile mills in England, fetching high prices. Mutton and beef were frozen and loaded onto steamers bound for European markets as refrigeration technology advanced. Towns like Punta Arenas in Chile and Comodoro Rivadavia in Argentina blossomed as trade hubs, their docks busy with outbound wool and inbound supplies for ranches. By the early 20th century, a few ranching dynasties amassed legendary fortunes. The Braun Menendez family, for example, became known as the Lords of Patagonia. By the 1960s, their descendants still managed a conglomerate, La Anónima, that ran 600,000 sheep on their estates and controlled stores, ships, and even an airline, a Patagonia-wide empire built on livestock. The great estancieros built elegant mansions in Buenos Aires and Santiago, but their wealth flowed from the backs of sheep and cattle in faraway Patagonia. Yet this ranching golden age had a dark underside. The rapid expansion of ranches came at a terrible cost to indigenous peoples. The original inhabitants who had survived early military campaigns found themselves pushed to the margins. Sheep ranchers viewed the native hunter-gatherers as threats, competitors for land, or even as sheep thieves, and often took matters into their own hands. In Tierra del Fuego, the Selknam, or Ona people, were systematically hunted down in the late 1800s, a grim campaign encouraged by ranch owners who paid bounties for dead natives in order to protect their flocks. Missionary accounts and company records alike attest to massacres and forced removals. Within a few decades, most of Patagonia's indigenous communities were decimated or confined to missions, their way of life erased to clear the land for livestock. It's a chapter seldom highlighted in romantic tales of gauchos, but one that modern Patagonia is beginning to acknowledge. The foundations of the ranching industry were literally built on dispossession. By the 1920s, Patagonia's majestic estancias reigned over the land. Many adopted new technologies for the time. They strung barbed wire fences across what had been open range, installed windmills to pump scarce water for stock, and brought in pedigree bulls and rams to improve breeds. For a time, the combination of cheap land, abundant grass, and high wool prices made ranching extraordinarily profitable. But Patagonia's environment soon taught ranchers harsh lessons. European settlers had stocked the land based on experience in lusher climates and overstocked badly. By the mid-20th century, the consequences of overgrazing were evident. The once thick pasture of the steppe was depleted, native shrubs and grasses eaten down to stubble. Patagonia's infamous winds finished the job, blowing away desiccated topsoil and turning pasture into dust. Desertification set in on a vast scale. By the 1980s and 90s, sheep ranching in Patagonia was in steep decline, a far cry from its heyday. The numbers tell the story. Patagonia's sheep herd, which had been tens of millions strong, collapsed to about 8 million head by the early 2000s. Over the span of a decade, 12 to 18% of ranchers abandoned their estancias altogether, and rural employment in some provinces fell nearly 50%. Wool had lost value on the world market, competing with synthetic fibers, and overgrazed land could no longer sustain large flocks. Many old ranch families either sold off land or shifted their business focus. Some turned to oil and gas extraction or tourism. Cattle ranching, while always secondary to sheep and Patagonia's economy, began to play a more important role during this period of change. Notably, in parts of Argentine Patagonia, cattle herds steadily increased over the past 50 years, more than doubling since the 1950s. Ranchers introduced hardy cattle to areas where sheep weren't thriving, especially in the foothills and mountain valleys with tougher terrain and more predators, where sheep are harder to protect. By incorporating cattle, some ranches diversified their production, beef alongside wool, and made better use of the landscape. Even so, by the turn of the millennium, ranching was no longer the unchallenged economic king of Patagonia. Oil drilling, mining, fisheries, and tourism were rising, and many feared the Gaucho tradition might fade away with the aging generation of ranchers. Yet, in the face of these challenges, Patagonia's ranching culture has proven remarkably resilient and adaptive. The modern Patagonian rancher stands at a crossroads of old and new, working to preserve time-honored ways while innovating for sustainability. A vivid example of balancing tradition with change can be seen at Estancia Cerro Guido in Chilean Patagonia. Once part of the Great Sheep Empire near Torres del Paine, Cerro Guido remains a working ranch, indeed the largest in that region at about 250,000 acres, with more than 4,000 head of cattle and 18,000 sheep grazing its lands. For generations, Cerro Guido and ranches like it treated Patagonia's apex predator, the puma, as the enemy. Ranchers hired leoneros, professional hunters to shoot pumas on sight, and well into the 20th century, dozens were killed each year on some estancias. But times are changing. Today, Cerro Guido has stopped hunting pumas and is pioneering a program to coexist with the big cats. In a creative twist, they transformed their former puma hunters into conservationists, using their tracking skills to monitor puma movements rather than eliminate them. The ranch introduced non-lethal deterrents, the most successful being a new employee with 4 legs and a tail, specially trained sheepdogs. At Cerro Guido, the ranchers imported Maremmano Abruzzese guard dogs from Italy, large snow-white dogs historically used to protect sheep from wolves. Raised from puppyhood among the lambs, these dogs bond with the flock and fiercely repel pumas. Simply having the dogs present and marking territory has significantly reduced puma attacks on Cerro Guido's sheep. As ranch manager Gonzalo Sanchez explained, the Gauchos were skeptical at first. After all, Patagonian culture is very conservative, and Gauchos are possibly the most stubborn of all. But seeing the dogs work changed minds. Now, instead of waging war on wildlife, this ranch finds pride in its cooperative approach, heritage and nature side by side. Tourists staying at the ranch's guest lodge can even accompany gauchos and biologists as they track pumas or visit the sheepdog kennels, turning conservation into part of the estancia's new economic model. As Sanchez put it, without a working estancia, you have no Gaucho culture, and without Gaucho culture, you have no Patagonia culture. Keeping the ranch alive, therefore, is inseparable from keeping Patagonia's identity alive, and that means embracing innovative methods to solve age-old conflicts between ranching and the wild. Across Patagonia, many modern ranchers are reinventing themselves in similar ways. Some estancias have diversified into guest ranches, inviting visitors from around the world to experience the Gaucho life firsthand. These agro-tourism ventures allow ranch families to earn income by sharing their traditions, guiding tourists on horseback rides through the mountains, teaching them how to shear a sheep or saddle a horse, and serving homemade asados under the open sky. Such tourism not only provides a financial boost, it also instills pride in younger generations, showing that the old ways can captivate outsiders and thus are worth preserving. Other ranchers are focusing on the growing market for sustainable grass-fed beef. In fact, Patagonia is emerging as a source of premium organic and regeneratively raised beef. In Chile, a cooperative of ranchers recently became the country's first to export certified regenerative grass-fed beef, branded Range Patagonian, to the United States. This beef comes from cattle raised on native Patagonian pastures with holistic grazing practices, and it meets standards that ensure the land's health is improving year by year. Consumers in America can now literally get a taste of Patagonia's grasslands, an astonishing full-circle moment where a remote Gaucho tradition connects to health-conscious grocery shoppers thousands of miles away. The program's founders emphasize that Patagonia is a unique and special place and that their goal is to preserve the land and keep it in its pure and healthy state while producing excellent beef. In other words, stewardship and profitability are being woven together, much as Patagonia's pioneers once dreamed, but now with an eye to long-term ecological survival. Technological and scientific advances are also quietly making their way into ranch management on the steppe. Some larger estancias have begun using solar-powered electric fences to subdivide pastures and implement rotational grazing, an unheard-of idea in old, extensive systems. By resting parts of the pasture each season, they aim to give native grasses a chance to recover and thus avoid the mistakes of the past. Studies in Patagonia have shown that with moderate, well-timed grazing interventions, as opposed to continuous overgrazing, plant biodiversity can be maintained or even increase. This knowledge is guiding new range management plans. In Argentina, government and international partners, like the UN Development Program, have worked on programs to help ranchers adopt sustainable land management, SLM, teaching everything from soil monitoring to using mobile apps for tracking herd movement. Such concepts might sound academic, but many gauchos see the tangible benefits: healthier pastures, fatter cows, and resilience against drought. And drought is an ever-present worry. Patagonia's climate has always been dry, but climate change threatens to bring even more variability. Some areas have seen significant rainfall shifts in the past decades, and the recent global trend of extreme droughts has not spared Argentina's south. In response, forward-looking ranchers are reducing stocking rates to match the new normal of the land's carrying capacity, even if that means fewer animals in the short term. One regenerative rancher explained that after several years of drought, they cut their herd size in half to avoid overtaxing the fragile grass, and in doing so, improved the calving rate and overall ranch productivity. These adjustments echo an emerging philosophy. Patagonia's ranching future will be about quality over quantity. Quality beef, quality wool, and quality stewardship, rather than simply running the maximum number of animals. Perhaps the most critical factor in sustaining Patagonia's ranching heritage is people. The aging Gaucho population needs a new generation to carry the torch. On this front, there are glimmers of hope. Young Patagonians who once left for city jobs are starting to return, drawn by government incentives or simply a change in values that favors a rural lifestyle. Some have acquired technical education in agriculture and now apply it back home, introducing, for instance, better veterinary care for livestock or new pasture seeding techniques. Others come for the first time, inspired by the romance of the Gaucho. Programs exist now that allow urban students or foreign volunteers to spend a season working on a ranch, giving them a taste of the lifestyle, and sometimes leading to permanent involvement. Communities and schools in the region also play a role by incorporating Gaucho history and practical ranch skills into local education, so that Patagonian kids grow up with respect for their roots. It's a slow cultural shift, but it underscores a key point. The Gaucho is evolving, not extinct. As proof, one can attend a festival in Rio Gallegos or Punta Arenas today and still see Gaucho horsemanship competitions, hear folk songs about the open range, and watch old and young dance the chamamé and cueca, traditional dances, in their berets and boots. In the end, Patagonia's cattle frontier endures by balancing reverence for tradition with openness to change. On a crisp morning, you might still find a Gaucho riding out, much as his great-grandfather did, singing softly to calm the cattle as they move to summer pasture. But look closer, and you may notice he carries a radio to check in with the ranch house, and the cattle might be part of a certified organic program that ships premium beef to restaurants abroad. The essence, the connection of human, herd, and land, remains unbroken. The challenges of the 21st century are real: economic swings, climate unpredictability, and competition from other land uses will test Patagonia's ranchers. Yet, as this documentary has shown, these forgotten giants of ranching are far from defeated. They are adapting with the same grit that allowed their ancestors to prosper in this beautiful, harsh land. In Patagonia, the legend of giants lives on, not in mythical 9-foot natives, but in the outsized spirit of its ranchers and the enormous landscapes they call home. The Gauchos of Patagonia continue to ride under the same endless skies, guarding traditions as they guide their herds. By honoring the old ways while embracing new solutions, they ensured that the cowboy heritage at the end of the world not only survives, but thrives. And so, as the sun sets over the Andes, sending golden light across the plains, we conclude our journey, knowing that the story of Patagonia's ranching giants, once forgotten, will be remembered and carried forward, on the hoof and in the heart, for generations to come.